Lost Caverns of Ixalan is right around the corner, and with the full set out as of the recording of this video, I wanted to go over the best commons from this set. And with new mechanics and just different versions of cards that you already love in Pauper, it's no surprise that Lost Caverns of Ixalan is going to have a big shift for the Pauper power level. Now, if you think any cards on this list are missing or just anything is out of order, I'd love to hear it in the comment section down below. And of course, this video is going to be brought to you in part by the MTG Ambassador Program. So for all of your Lost Cavern of Ixalan needs for Pauper or anything else beyond, check the link out down below. You won't be disappointed in the cards that we have to talk about and what you want to look for. Now, let's hop right into it. No honorable mentions whatsoever with number 5. The first card that I want to talk about that is going to make a change, in my opinion, in the Pauper format is Hidden Necropolis. More specifically, the, well, Discover lands. That's what I'm going to call them here. They're the caves, the Discover caves that come into the battlefield tapped, and so they meet that Pauper power level. They're not untapped, which would be insane. They add to the color of their corresponding type. So there's like a black version, which we're showing here. There's a blue one, there's a green one, blah, blah, blah. You sacrifice, you discover 4. I already made a video comparing Discover to Cascade, the pros and cons, and how they're implemented in different cards in this set already. But at common, these lands are very interesting. Not a lot of players, and me included, understand where this card is exactly going to go. And for now, we're going to try it as value. Now, we're not modern. First and foremost, we don't have Amulet of Vigor. So having them come in untapped to use them immediately or as a form of ramp, I mean, Pauper would have been doing that already. But I think as value lands, where maybe in decks like Tron, where you have excess mana, you're playing these tap lands and you need a way to use up your lands for value in the late game to find more cards or scry, then I think a card like this is actually very valuable. And where I'm personally going to be testing this is with the blue version, and specifically looking for it in a deck like Turbo Fog, where you're already using lands like Quandrix Campus, and obviously Quandrix Campus has that upside of continuously being able to use this. You're paying 4, it's less, you're scrying, and you have the 2 colors that it taps for. But I think in a lot of scenarios with Turbo Fog, you are looking for just the next spell. You do end up with a lot of lands, not a lot of things to do with it, so action is key. And of course, you're only able to do it as a sorcery, so you're not going to be doing it at end step on your opponent's turn. But I think finding different ways of getting value out of your lands is very important for decks that want to go long. So again, something like Turbo Fog or something like Tron is, I think, the first place to try out decks like this or cards like this, especially in a more aggressive format. You want your cards to do things and not middle around. So I think just having the ability to cast these spells is very key. And of course, if the card isn't as great right now, you can just put it in your hand. For example, if you discover into a removal card, you can just put it in your hand, save that removal card for later, and then your opponent is now going to have to play this mind game of what creatures do I play out, what cards do I play out, because my opponent has that card or a counter spell. So Discover is actually really nice in that sense, so keep it in mind. I think it's going to have that late game value if you can get there against the burn and mono blue decks. Now at number 4, the next card that I want to talk about is going to be Mephitic Draught. Now this is very much an analog to a card that already is a Pauper staple in many ways. Let's read it. 1 black and 1 for an artifact. Whenever Mephitic Draught enters the battlefield or is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose a life. Now, straight up, the first thing you should be thinking about is Ichor Wellspring, Pauper staple in Affinity, and any deck that plays Deadly Dispute, honestly. It's going to be that analog of, well, Ichor Wellspring is 2 colorless, so it's easier to cast. It also doesn't lose you the life, but it's not trying to be better than Ichor Wellspring. I think this card is printed to be Ichor Wellspring copies 5 through 8. So in decks, again, that play Deadly Dispute, like Black-Green Gardens, I think this is going to be a very valuable piece as copies 5, copy 6 of Ichor Wellspring, additional sack fodder, additional things that can hit the graveyard and draw you cards. And especially with the card that we're going to mention later in this video, I think is going to go very well with a card like that. Deadly Dispute, obviously just one of the more powerful cards in the Pauper format right now, defining in playing black in general in the format. Drawing 3 cards and just having additional consistency on top of that is very key. Remember, cards like Lembas that exist in this deck really are in there not only for the draw, but to gain 3 life. So the fact that it has the double synergy against burn is very key. So I think, you know, losing life is very relevant in a burn heavy meta, but drawing cards is also very important if you're looking for your removal, if you're looking for your win cons like the Avenging Hunter and the Dungeon. So again, having those additional draws is very, very important. Now at number 3, I want to talk about a card that I think is the only creature in common at common from this set that has discovered 3. I've done the search a couple of times. I might be missing something. Maybe something changes last minute, but black and 4 for a creature insect horror 5/2. Whenever Primordial Gnawer dies, discover 3. Now, the card itself is interesting in a sacrifice style of deck. There are a lot of mid-range decks in the format right now, surprisingly, with the amount of aggro and tempo that exists at the top end of the Pauper format right now. And especially with the deck list I just mentioned, I think Black-Green Gardens is a very good home for something like this. Again, especially for a card that we're going to mention later on. I've been teasing this for a little bit, but in a deck that wants to sacrifice things, in a deck that plays Deadly Dispute, I think just having additional things that you can sack with it is very key. Sacrificing an artifact or a creature, you don't just have to hit your Ichor Wellsprings or just any of the artifact or creature. You can hit this one and then maybe stop a removal spell. Maybe your opponent's hitting it with because it's a 5/2, your opponent could hit it with something like a Helix, and then they're gaining some life, but then you can prevent that. You could sacrifice it and then just draw another card, literally cast another card. And what's nice is you Deadly Dispute, draw some cards, whatever, that trigger goes off, and then you can Deadly Dispute again, because then you create a treasure token that you can then sacrifice to another Deadly Dispute. And then because of Discover, you're not forced to cast the card. As I just mentioned, when this creature dies, and you get to discover that card, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. That means even if the removal spell that you find is dead, you can play that mind game. As I mentioned with my previous example in the land portion of the things, Primordial Gnawer is actually more powerful than you think. It wants to enter the graveyard. It wants to die as a 5/2. I think additional sack fodder is really cool. I think as a 1/2 of, this could be a really cool card in the Gardens deck. Any deck that's playing Deadly Dispute, honestly, as extra sacrifice fodder, Discover is a lot better than people are giving it credit for, and especially as the only creature with Discover, it's worth the time. Now, at number 2, I want to talk about Goblin Tomb Raider. 1 mana for a 1/2 Goblin pirate creature. As long as you control an artifact, Goblin Tomb Raider gets +1/+0 and haste. That's right, for 1 mana, if you have a Great Furnace as your first land drop, which is an artifact, taps for red, you play this card, it is now a 1 mana 2/2 with haste, and now is a build your own Goblin Guide. Now, modern staple, burn legend in older formats, Goblin Guide is a Pauper Goblin Guide worth its weight in salt? Is it going to be worth the aggression, worth the power, toughness? Because ultimately, is it better than Monastery Swiftspear? The most comparable thing, a 1 mana 1/2 creature with haste. Swiftspear is honestly just better at the end of the day. Let's be honest, especially later in the game when you chain a couple spells together, it always makes combat tricky. If you have cards in your hand, even if you're bluffing it and it's just lands, your opponent always has to think about if you have 2 spells, 3 spells, however many spells in your hand, how combat works. Whereas with the Tomb Raider itself, they only have to think about it being 1 power or 2 powers. So it's very set in its ways, but it's aggressive because it doesn't really have a downside other than going to 1 power. Now, I think in artifact-based aggro decks that are using Kuldotha Rebirth to create goblins and then attacking in with the giant bushwhacker and then, you know, playing Galvanic Blast, I think a deck list like that will, honestly, this will be just the #1 pick for it. You are 100% playing this card in it. But is it going to replace Swiftspear in the burn decks? Maybe if the meta shifts a little bit, Swiftspear is honestly better. We'll see where it goes, but it has a home in Pauper. Maybe not exactly in burn, but if burn is allowed to get more aggressive and then get away from the fact that it's really slow right now, it's playing a lot of exile effects, a lot of slow long game effects to try and beat the blue decks and other mid-range strategies in the format. If you can get away from that, then I think a card like this has home in traditional burn, whereas now it's going to be more in an artifact, creature-based, board-based Kuldotha version of the archetype. Now, at number 1, the card that I think is going to make the biggest shift in the Pauper metagame by miles, in my opinion, is going to be Fanatical Offering. 2 mana as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, draw 2 cards, and create a map token. Guess what, folks? This is creating a map token. Is this better than a treasure token? Because if you didn't understand what I just said, I pretty much read the text of Deadly Dispute, but instead of creating a treasure, it creates a map token, which, as you see on the screen, for 1, you tap it, sacrifice the token, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. Now, the explore portion, I kind of included a creature for kind of better visibility here. 1 mana for a 1/1 here. When Snow Scout enters the battlefield, it explores. You reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, so if it's a non-land, put a 1/1 counter on this creature, then put the card back so you don't draw it. You put it back or you put it in your graveyard. So there's so many elements to this. You have some graveyard fueling, you have buffing your own creatures, you have drawing cards. Now, really what you're trying to value with the Deadly Dispute is when you sacrifice something like an Ichor Wellspring with Deadly Dispute, you're drawing 3 cards off the Ichor Wellspring drawing and then creating a treasure token. Now, the treasure token is actually pretty big. I don't think this card is better than Deadly Dispute because Deadly Dispute essentially costs 1. You pay 2 for it, but you get the payback with the treasure token. And treasure token ultimately allowing you to cast any color is very important in the Grixis Affinity list. Being able to be, black, red, heavy, and then have blue for a counter spell, whatever it might be. The color is very important. And I don't think it's better because of that, but the map token is really going to allow this card to be versions 5 and 6, maybe even more, of Deadly Dispute. Black-Green Gardens decks, mono-black decks, any list playing Deadly Dispute wants copies of this card because it draws you cards. You could pay 2 mana to be, or 3 mana in total to be drawing 4 cards. You could be buffing one of your creatures. You could feed your graveyard a little bit. I think the treasure token is really underrated. It's not better than a treasure, but I think ultimately this card is going to go the mile and really change the Pauper format, make the black deck smoother, and potentially put the black decks over the edge. There's a lot of powerful card draw in black right now, a lot of easy ways to feed your graveyard. So it's really going to come down to see if additional copies of Deadly Dispute really puts these decks over the edge. I think it will. I think we're about to see a new challenger in the format, and well, let's see what happens with the Pauper format with these cards introduced from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Now, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think about my list. Is there anything out of order? Is there any cards that I'm missing? I'd love to hear in the comment section down below because I'm going to be doing a lot of testing from this set. There's so many cool mechanics, heck, Pauper, modern, everything. I want to hear about it down below. Let me know what you want to see me play on the channel in future videos. I'd love to hear from it, especially if the cards come from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan.